Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 324. I'm recording this on November 21st, 2024, and this will go live on November 25th, 2024. And if you're watching me on YouTube, hi there. If you are listening to this on the audio, hello. If you're listening to the audio, you don't see that I've actually upgraded and I've added a professional mic. And over the next couple of weeks, I'm adding just more technical upgrades so that the quality of the audio and the video continues to be top notch. So here we go. We're going to dive into today's episode. The other thing that I'm experimenting with is actually adding more of a transcript to the show notes. So I highly encourage you, if you're not the kind of person who's been looking at the show notes after you listen to the episode, hop over to that and take a look, because you might see something in writing that you missed when you were listening or when you were watching. And also it gives you an opportunity to take a look at some of the takeaways, take a look at some of the detail of what we discussed, so that if you want to use it either in your training or your training, obviously, to be a yoga teacher, if you want to write down some of the experiments that we talk about, some of the things that I offer you as takeaways, as call to actions that you can use in your classes, you've got those notes to look back on. So what we're going to cover today, and if you listened to last week's episode, you heard that I was introducing a new format, one where I really want to demonstrate at the beginning of the episode what you're going to get out of it, because I value your time. And I want you to know, as soon as you hit play to listen to this episode, what you're going to get from it. So in today's episode, we are going to discuss several different common scenarios that happen in your classes. And what you're going to learn is an approach to each one, so that when one of these things inevitably comes up, if it hasn't already, instead of getting nervous and instead of wondering, what am I supposed to do in this situation, you'll know exactly what to do. Now, having said that, this is just my opinion based on 22 years of teaching. And even though I'm a very experienced yoga teacher, how I approach these things might be different from how you approach them. But this will at least give you a place to start from, or maybe it will give you a different perspective than the one that you currently have about one of these scenarios. And that's actually more of what I hope to do in this episode is give you an idea of what's possible. Because many times what yoga teachers, when I have conversations with them, what ends up coming to light is that they really think that there's only one way to teach, to approach certain scenarios, to share cues, to show up in your classes, whether it's practicing with your class or using certain cues or prepping for hours before your class or changing your sequence all the time. It's amazing to me, kind of not, but in a way it is amazing to me, how teachers will tell me what's not working for them, but yet they'll dig their heels in to justifying why they're doing the very things that are causing them problems. And I've talked about some of these things a lot in the past. I just want to touch on one example. So the example, to bring it to light, the example of every time you go into your class, you really want to be the kind of teacher who can do the walk and talk. You want to walk around the room more than practice with your class. But every time you go into the studio to teach, after a few minutes in the beginning of class of walking around, you get drawn back to your mat. Matter of fact, I had a phone call with a yoga teacher just yesterday, and she described she so wanted to be or wants to be the kind of teacher who walks around the room. And what she said to me was, as soon as I start walking around at the beginning, if I get the sense that they're not understanding my cues, I just dive back onto the mat. And so this is part of the problem, that there's a desire to be a different kind of teacher than the teacher is actually being. And so in that scenario, what we want to do is look at, well, what's causing you to constantly jump back on the mat? And many times it's either because I don't think my cues are working and or I don't know my sequence. And so the solution to those situations is either to learn a better way to share crystal clear cues, or to go into your class with the same sequence week after week until you get so good at teaching it, you can walk around to teach it without notes. And guess what? Getting all that prep time back. Because when you lean into teaching a signature sequence, you won't have to do any prep, because every week you'll be teaching the same thing. And your students will get to know you for that sequence, and they'll look forward to coming to your classes and getting better and better at doing it. This is one of the ways you stand out from all the other teachers who are running around driven by this belief that they need to change their sequence all the time. When in actuality, you'll be getting a good night's sleep. You'll have all this time back because you won't need to be prepping. And every time you go into the room and teach that signature sequence, you'll get known better as the teacher who teaches the sequence I love, and you'll get better at teaching it. So it's a total win-win. So with that as our backdrop, let's go into some of these scenarios, and I want you to see if any of these hit home for you. And I'm going to say, at the end of this episode, I'm going to give you an experiment. And as you're listening to the show here, you're probably on your phone. If you're finding that some of these scenarios are things that have happened to you, I want you to send me a DM on Instagram. My handle is Barebones Yoga, and let me know, yes, totally, that has been me. I have had that situation happen to me. These are scenarios that I've experienced multiple times over the years, and these are also scenarios that teachers have told me about. Now, one quick side note that's sort of related. I saw something on TikTok yesterday, and I want to share it with you. I don't know who the creator was, but I bet you could probably do a little searching on TikTok and find it. It was a post by I don't know if she was a yoga teacher or a Pilates teacher. She might have been a yoga teacher, actually. And she posted that where she lives in Chicago, somebody went to her studio and listed out all the teachers whose classes she's attended and wrote a review for each teacher and ranked them, and publicly sent this out either on her social media or on Yelp or on the studio's Instagram page. Somehow she made this information public. Her assessment of the teachers, and she ranked them from lowest to highest. And the video that this creator was making was basically to put this person on blast, to basically say, I can't believe you would do this. Yoga teachers, all of us as movement professionals are putting ourselves out there, and I can't believe that you would put yoga teachers on blast and rank them. And when I looked at the comments, all the comments were very much in line with her perspective. And in fact, some of the comments were from newer yoga teachers who were expressing their fear that this could happen to them. So I was going to comment to that video, but I didn't want to get sucked into a whole negative experience with people probably reacting to my comment, because I have somewhat of a hot take on this sort of thing. But I wanted to tell it to you, because this sort of thing, although the literal scenario here probably won't happen to you, because it's pretty rare, even in today's times with how much social media exposure is out there, it's pretty rare that someone would be so mean-spirited to do something like this. And make no mistake about it, this is a mean person. There is no value in this person sharing this information. This is not even like a restaurant review. Like, I want to just let you know my experience at this restaurant wasn't so great. And we can even sort of debate if that's even helpful to anybody, because it brings up the actual essence of my hot take, which is everybody's going to have their own experience in your yoga class, and you can't control that. They're going to judge you as a teacher. They're going to experience your class through the lens of how they experience the world, through the lens of their body, their capabilities, their beliefs. There's so many things that your yoga teaching is going to filter through in every single person that's in your class. And once we recognize that we have little to no control over their perception of our class, any sort of feedback we get is, if it's nice feedback, great. If it's bad feedback, so what? That's just that person's opinion. And so in this specific narrow situation, what I would say to any of the teachers that were put on blast by this mean-spirited person, so what? So what? Let it roll off your shoulders. Don't even give it another thought, because number one, we cannot be the yoga teacher for everybody. You can't, I can't, and that should not be our goal. Number two, we cannot control how anybody experiences our class. That's completely up to them. And number three, when we go in to teach our class, the goal is for us to teach a class in the best way possible for us, which I know sounds a little weird, because you're probably thinking, well, I thought I was supposed to go in and teach a class that's really good for them. But let's think about that. I don't know who's coming to my class. I can't control who shows up, but I can control how prepared I am, what I am prepared with. And once I step into the room, I can do a lot of things to make sure I'm putting myself in my most confident, empowered way of teaching. I can stick to the sequence that I prepared. I can walk around the room and make sure I have eyes on everybody. I can be sure I do a little meditation before class, so I'm nice and centered and calm. I can stay in sort of a non-reactive mode. So if something unexpected happens that typically might trigger me, I can just let it roll off my back. I can use crystal clear cues. I can show up with a signature sequence I know well. Those are the things that I can control. I can't control how they are going to absorb it, how they are going to react to it. And that really shouldn't be my concern. That's their choice to react how they want. So I wanted to just share that somewhat strange scenario. Hope it never happens to you. Hope it never happens to me. But even if it did, I would not even care. In fact, in this sort of thing, like in all negative social media posts, what it actually does is it shares more about the person that did it than the person they're talking about. So with that, let's go into the actual scenarios that I wanted to cover in today's episode. So the first scenario is, I want you to imagine you walk in to teach your class, and instead of having a whole bunch of faces that you've seen before, you have a whole bunch of new faces. And you're noticing in the first 5 minutes of teaching this class that a lot of the new people to your class are at a completely different level of experience than your regular group. Some of them, you can tell, are really experienced with yoga. Some of them, you can tell, are really raw beginners. And then you've got the regular folks that show up all the time. So in the first few minutes of your class, you start to get really nervous because you're thinking, oh my God, I came prepared with a particular sequence, but now I'm worried that the people that look really new aren't going to be able to do it. And I'm worried that the people that are really experienced aren't going to be challenged by this. So you start to stand there and question yourself and start to consider changing your sequence on the fly. So what do? So what I would say in general is, unless you have years and years of experience like me, don't change the sequence you came prepared with. And honestly, I even lean into that logic, even being someone with over 20 years of experience teaching yoga. Because as soon as you decide to change what you came prepared with, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to be teaching at the highest level possible for you. But what many teachers think is, I want to change it because I want to be sure it's meeting the needs of all these students. And I'm here to tell you, unless that ability is right there for you, something you can easily do, you have no obligation to do that. Everybody who's coming to your class is coming of their own free will, and they are at whatever level they are at in terms of practicing yoga. They're at whatever level, whatever, I don't want to say level, but whatever their physical movement capabilities are, whatever their general mobility is, whatever their general sense of body awareness is and proprioception, whatever their muscular strength and flexibility. These are all parameters of movement. And you're teaching movement when you're teaching yoga. And there's no way you are ever going to create a sequence that meets the needs of every single student. The only way to do that, to some degree, is to teach a private session, which you're probably not teaching privates, you're probably mostly teaching group classes. So if we take that line of thinking and we say, okay, well then how am I supposed to help the people who are struggling with the sequence that I came prepared to teach? Like, now I'm in the middle of teaching it and I can see they're falling over. I can see they look really confused. So obviously, in any situation like this, you want to have a balance between sticking to the sequence you came prepared to teach, because that's going to put you in the best situation to teach, and helping people who look like they need some help. So how can you do this? What does this actually look like at the tactical level, at the ground level? Well, number one, it absolutely looks like getting off the damn yoga mat and walking around and looking at your students. The way to help a student who's struggling is not for you to do a whole bunch of stuff and just say to them, either literally saying it or by your actions saying it, just mimic me. That doesn't really teach them anything. You want them, and maybe you don't know this, or maybe you don't agree with this, I don't know, but what I want for my students is for them to learn how to listen to the cues and make them happen in their body, instead of creating this dependency on them to me to only be able to learn by seeing me. That's not helping them build the neuromuscular pathways that they need to build so that they can practice yoga. And furthermore, if that's what I am leaning into as a teacher, what point is it for the person to come to my class? They could just as soon stay home and do a video. If you want to stand out as a teacher, get off the yoga mat and start walking around. And this is one way to put you in a position where you can share crystal clear cues and really help all your students, not the least of which are the students who are having a tough time. The second thing you can do in this situation is lean into clear action cues. When you have a class with people of mixed experience, the last thing that I would suggest you do is use somatic cues, use anatomy cues, use alignment cues, use conversational cues, which is basically having a conversation versus short phrases. And the best thing you can do is to use action cues. And I always train the teachers who enroll in my program to format them in short action-oriented phrases. Step your foot forward, drop your back heel, center your hips, reach your arms up, bend your front knee, stack your knee over your heel, center your kneecap, whatever it is. Some of the cues I just shared with you are alignment cues, but in general, what I just shared with you are action cues. Now, if you're interested in learning my cueing method that I use to teach inside my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, just send me a DM on Instagram and say you want the cues training video, and I'll send it to you. And let me know that you heard about it on the podcast. So those are different ways to deal with the situation where you've got a mixed level of student experience in your class. The other thing is you can offer modifications. Those are ways to dilute, to regress certain postures so that it makes them more accessible. But this really speaks to what's in your signature sequence. What I would highly recommend, unless you are a niche yoga teacher, which I define as a yoga teacher who's really only targeting a certain type of student with a high degree of flexibility in their classes. If you are not that type of teacher, and I think in general, most teachers are not that type of teacher. However, a lot of teachers do teach like that because they think that's what students want. And in actuality, in my opinion, what students want is to go into a class with a high degree of accessibility. In other words, they want to feel like they know what they're doing. And there are many common yoga poses that teachers present because they think they're fancy, they see other people do it, they experience it in other classes. And when you look at these poses, like double binding in side angle lunge, like lotus variation instead of traditional tree, these are variations that require excellent joint mobility, which many people do not have. And if you're offering things like this just because it seems sexy and fun and you experience it in other classes, or that's what you do in your practice, that's great, but that's not teaching. That's being a student. When we look at things through the lens of being a teacher, making your classes as accessible as possible is one of the best ways to help the people who take the time to come to your class really feel like they're building momentum. They're building momentum in the direction of doing it. And that's a way to make your classes grow in attendance, because people will come to your class and they'll tell their friends, even people that think I can't do yoga, and they'll tell their friends, wow, I'm going to this class, I'm really getting the hang of it. But if you're teaching niche yoga and you're only targeting a highly flexible person, most likely a woman, most likely a young woman, if that's truly your desire, go for it. If that's truly the type of yoga you practice and you want to teach, go for it. I just want you to be intentional about the type of yoga you present, and I want to be sure it relates to the vision you have for yourself as a teacher. So that's a question, that's a takeaway for you to ask yourself, what kind of teacher do I really want to be? And are my classes a reflection of that? Or are my classes a reflection of what I think a yoga teacher should be, or what I was trained to be? So that's a takeaway. Okay. Scenario number two is you are covering somebody else's class. Now, you might think when you're covering somebody else's class, it's just as simple as you stroll into the room and you teach the class, but that's not what that's about. You are there to cover for somebody else. So unless there's been some change on the website of the studio, the unspoken expectation is that you're going to present a class that mimics what the regular teacher does. Okay, so that means, number one, you've either taken the teacher's class and you have a sense of what she's teaching, or you have an understanding of the type of yoga that they teach, and you're able to do that. Now, of course, we're not saying literally down to every single pose in the sequence you need to match. But if you're regularly teaching yin and you cover someone's gentle class, those are different styles. If you regularly teach vinyasa and you're subbing a gentle class, those are different styles, and so on. So when you're covering a class, the number one responsibility is to make sure before you take that sub request on and say, yeah, I'll cover this class, that you know the type of class you're covering for. Better yet, either go take it so you're familiar with what the person's doing, or at least talk to the teacher. Let the teacher know that you're going to be covering on such and such a date, and see if you can get some information from them about what style of yoga they're teaching and how do they handle their sequence. Because even something as basic as how do they set up the room? Let's say when you teach in that studio, you set your students up to face north, but when this person teaches their class, they set up their students to face west. So when you go into the room, especially if you're covering a class in the studio where you regularly teach, which is most likely going to be the situation, but you're going in to teach somebody else's class, and if they have their students facing a different direction, you're either going to want to tell the students, hey guys, I'm covering and I actually would like you to face north. Or you're going to just decide, in order to keep things somewhat consistent, to not even change the way they're directing themselves and to just fall in line with the way this other teacher sets them up. So these are all things that are part of covering a class. Now, the other thing I'll speak to is the typical thing that a yoga teacher says when they go into a room to cover someone's class. They typically say something like, hi, my name is Karen. I'm here to cover for Sally. something along those lines. I hope you like it, or welcome, whatever. Now, while that might be nice, you don't necessarily have to say that, because in most instances, when everybody signed up for the class, they're going to see that Sally's not teaching the class, somebody else is. So they'll most likely know that you're covering. The point that I most strenuously want to emphasize here is that just keep your ears open for anything you say that is a put down to yourself. Not that you would intentionally do this, but it could be something that you unintentionally do because there's a part of you that's maybe nervous about covering. There's maybe a part of you that doesn't think you're good enough to cover this class, but maybe you agreed to do it and now you're doing it and you're really nervous. I've had teachers tell me when they cover for the studio owner, they get nervous up to 2 or 3 days before, asking themselves over and over again, why did I agree to sub this class? So they go into the room and not only are they super nervous, but they say something like, oh, I hope you like it, or I hope it's not too bad. You know, I'm here covering for Kelly and I hope you like it. I know I'm not as good as Kelly, but hopefully you'll like what I offer. I just want you to appreciate that you are your own amazing teacher and you don't need to compare yourself to anybody else. And furthermore, when you agree to sub somebody else's class, that's a service to the students. You didn't have to do that. You're agreeing to sub so that the students can continue to practice yoga at the same time, at the same place, even though their regular teacher is gone. I'll tell you a quick story about this. Many years ago, probably over 15 years ago, I had to do a last minute sub at a studio I taught at for a while. And the person's class that I was covering was a really popular teacher. And she had a really close relationship with her students. In fact, it was so close that I actually thought it bordered on the unprofessional. Because when I would show up to teach my classes, if she was on the way out, I would hear all these deeply personal conversations she was having with her students. And I would see this sort of clinginess that her students had with her. And so I actually thought, from a professional scope of practice, it was really a little bit over the top. But again, everybody does whatever they want to do. They are the kind of teacher they want to be, and I encourage you to do the same. But I do encourage you to be aware of professional boundaries with your students. And that's a whole other episode we can do, but I think you get the gist. And so this was the teacher who at the last minute I needed to cover for, or I didn't need to do it. I was asked, could I do it? And so I agreed. And when I walked into the studio and started to take my coat off, people were filing in to take this person's class. And there was a woman at the front desk and she saw me come in and she said to the woman working the desk behind the counter there, oh my God, is she teaching? And she pointed to me. And I heard it. I was right there. And the woman behind the desk said, oh yeah, so-and-so had a family emergency, so Karen agreed to cover. And this woman hightailed it out of there. She left. Now, this was in full earshot of students in the lobby and students in the studio, because the room was right next to the lobby and the studio door was open. So I had to pull myself together and go in there and teach the class, knowing that a lot of people had heard of this person say this. This woman was certainly not leaving because she liked my classes. And the interesting thing was, she'd never even been to any of my classes. In my perception, she was so attached to this other teacher that in her mind, she was either going to take class with that person or it wasn't worth doing. And let me tell you something, when you go over the top with your connections to your students and don't abide by boundaries, and they get dependent on you, that's a real problem. Because now the practice is not about the practice, it's about you and your personality. And in my opinion, you never want to be the kind of teacher that makes it all about them. You want your students to focus on the practice, and it doesn't matter who's teaching. Now, of course, in the real world, you're going to go to classes taught by people that you like. But once you're in a situation where you go to the studio and you've moved through all that resistance to get yourself there, why in the world would you turn around simply because somebody is teaching the class that maybe you don't prefer? I don't get it, but obviously it can happen. So I just share that with you as an illustration of this whole topic of subbing classes. Number 3, someone leaves class early. So you're teaching a class, you're well into the middle of it, and someone gets up, rolls up their mat, and walks out. You immediately go into your head, you immediately make it about you, you start to get nervous, your heart starts to race, you start to get a little sweaty, you get distracted, you might even lose your place in the sequence, and for the whole rest of the class, you're starting to think, or you keep thinking, what did I do wrong? Why has this person left early? What's wrong with me? I'm not good enough, etc., etc. I'm going to tell you something. When somebody leaves your class early, 9 times out of 10, it has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. Who knows? Kid could be sick. They could be sick. They could have changed their mind and decided they don't have time for yoga. They could have anxiety. They could have depression. They could have gotten a call and maybe you didn't see their phone was available and they got some call or text that something emergent came up. Who knows? Who cares? This relates back to what I said when we were talking about that other thing. You can't control your students. So don't even worry for 1 second about anybody leaving your class early. Instead of making it about you, make it about them, because that's who it's about. They're the ones leaving, not you. So instead of making it about you and beating yourself up, as soon as you see somebody get up to leave early, even if it's in the last 2-3 minutes of class, which of course drives me crazy, but hey, I can't make people stay. Send them off with a silent wish of compassion. Send them off with just a silent thought in your head. I wish you peace. I wish you love. I wish you compassion. I wish you a great rest of the day. And just let that soothe that part of you that wants to make it about you. It's not about you. And let me just say one last thing. Even in the scenario, which you'll never know might actually have been the case, that they're in there, they're doing the practice, you're teaching the class, and they're hating it. Let's say they think you're the worst teacher ever, or let's say they just don't like it and they leave. So what? Revert back to what we talked about at the beginning. You can't be the yoga teacher for everybody, and wouldn't you rather whittle out the people that aren't a good fit for your class and instead invest your time and energy and focus on the students who keep showing up? End of story. Okay, the next scenario is your cues are not working. Now, the only way you're going to know this is if you're watching them. If you're doing your practice, you're probably not going to know. You're missing all the clues that they're desperately trying to share with you, but you're missing them because you're doing your practice. I know you know how I feel about this, but again, I need to emphasize, you can do whatever you want. I am not continuing to bring this topic up because I want you to feel badly if you're practicing with your class. If you can truly look yourself in the eye, truly look yourself in the mirror, I should say, and say, I'm practicing with my students. It makes no difference to me. I love doing it. This is how I choose to show up as a yoga teacher. Then go ahead, keep going on with your bad self. But if you really desire to be a different kind of teacher, one who does the walk and talk, and you're just not sure how to do it, Let me show you how. Just send me a DM on Instagram. Tell me you want to learn how to do the walk and talk, and I'll get you started. So your cues are not working. You know they're not working because you've been teaching for a couple of minutes. You've taken them through a pose or two. You're doing the walk and talk, and you're seeing as you're saying the cues, a lot of people are out of alignment. People maybe look a little confused. So what do you do? So similar to what I talked about in an earlier scenario, the first thing you're going to do is revert back to action cues. Stop talking so much, stop going into anatomy cues, somatic cues, or alignment cues, and go back to the basics of clear, short action phrases and amplify or intensify the amount of time you are spending watching them, and change, i.e., rephrase what you are saying when you see somebody's out of alignment and not getting it. Doesn't matter if it's just one person. Any corrective cue you give to one person is definitely going to help a handful of other people, because you can't always see what everybody is doing, even when you're walking around. So use the walking around and observing them as ways or inspiration to you changing your cues. This is a sign of an amazing teacher. They're not a robot. They're not a parrot. They're not just repeating the same thing from a script. They're actually in real time, by observing their students, changing their cues. This is how students feel seen. This is how students learn better. Not by watching the teacher, but by tapping into their own feelings in their body and integrating what they hear you say into their body. And when you say something different, I'm not saying call out anybody. Oh, Bob, can you shift your knee over your heel more? Nobody wants to be called out in yoga. Like, I never understood why teachers did that. It was almost done, I felt, as a way to show off that you know somebody's name, or as a way to maybe make students feel like, oh, I know your name, that's a good thing. But I would rather have you acknowledge me when I walk into the studio, oh, hi, Karen, than have you, while I'm in practice, say, Karen, can you bring your knee over your heel? I know whenever Baron used to do that to me when I was a newer student, newer teacher, I always felt called out, and I always felt shocked. Like, I'm in my practice, I'm in this vibe of motion, right? And all of a sudden I hear my name. It's very startling. Now, again, that's just my perception. This is a perfect example of perception is just my own, just like your perception is your own. I'm just sharing this with you as a potential different way to approach things in the event your students don't like being called out. And why even go there? The idea is you're walking around, and it just gives you an ability to see and change things on the fly. So that's the next scenario. The next scenario is, what happens if you forget a side or make a mistake? This will definitely happen. It happened to me the other night. I forgot an entire side of side plank. And do you know what I did? As soon as I went to the next pose, I realized I forgot the left side of, not side angle, what did I say? Side plank. And I just said, looks like I forgot that other side. You know what? No big deal. We got plenty of other poses to do. Nobody cared. A couple people laughed. I laughed. It just rolled off my shoulder. And that, in part, comes from experience, but it also comes from bringing down the intensity level, from doing the sequence perfectly, the goal, and instead making the goal showing up and doing your best. And that just makes it so much more of a human, relatable, authentic experience where the pressure's off. Now I'm just there as the facilitator, as the yoga teacher, and I'm just allowing space for what's happening. And because I'm teaching my signature sequence that I know well, that I'm teaching without notes, and I'm teaching by doing the walk and talk, I have mental space for the inevitable problem, error, mistake that's going to show up. And because I have extra mental space, a lot of it, I can just deal with it. I can just say, oh, no big deal. But if I was tied to my mat, looking at my notes, super nervous that I don't remember the sequence because I just created it the day before, and a mistake happens, now I'm over the top. It's a red alarm fire. So this is another justification for sticking with a signature sequence. And then the last scenario is special requests before class. I think it's so funny when people come to class and as they're filing in, they start talking to the teacher about, oh, can we focus on a lot of core? Oh, can we focus on a lot? Like, what do we think this is? This is not a restaurant. Like, to some degree, I am experienced enough that if you ask me to focus on XYZ, I can probably shift what I've done to either insert a posture that addresses that, or I can speak to that muscle group in the sequence that I'm already planning to teach. But this is what I mean about you're there as the teacher. And I firmly believe that the scales have tipped out of balance. And so many teachers tell me stories about how they feel like the students are actually running the show. And they don't literally say that, but the behaviors and the problems they're having in their classes illustrate that they're no longer teaching the class. They're there with this sort of consumer-focused mindset that whatever the students want, the students will get. If the students in the front row don't want to follow the sequence that I'm teaching and want to do their own thing, that's totally fine. If students want to request certain things, I need to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to meet those requests. If students in the front are raw beginners, I can't teach the sequence I want to teach because they're not going to get it. There's all of this leaning so far to the side of making this a high-level consumer experience. This is yoga. This is not picking off a menu. And when you come to take a yoga class, you're coming to be taught by somebody. You're not coming to ask for certain things to be covered. If that's what you want, stay at home and practice, or become a yoga teacher and then teach what you want. So this is what I mean. I'm being a little hyperbolic here, a little over the top to make my point. I know that you know that I'm not suggesting you go in there and steamroll over people. But the thing that I worry about, and I don't worry about this out of thin air, it concerns me because of real conversations I have with teachers, is that teachers get themselves into trouble because they get into areas they're unfamiliar with out of a true heart-centered desire to be nice to people, to meet their needs, to meet their expectations. This is a group yoga class. This is not a one-on-one. So when you go in to teach a group of people, many of whom will show up that you've never met, you've got to really know your sequence. And anybody asking you beforehand, hey, can we do a little of this or do a little of that? Well, you know what? Here's what you're going to say. Oh, we're going to have plenty of amazing things we're going to do in this class. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Right? This is a sign of a teacher who's in control, who's confident, who isn't going to let the tail wag the dog. Right? And then you're going to check with that student at the end of class. Hey, so good to see you. Not, oh, did you like it? Did you feel like we did enough core? Again, that's putting you in this passive role. You're there as the teacher. And don't get me wrong, this is not a power dynamic I'm talking about. But I'm talking about these topics, and a lot of them pull on a similar thread in service to empowering you, rather than this perception that you are this disempowered person who's just there to sort of follow along what anybody wants to do. People are coming and going, you're making it about you, people are asking for certain things, and now you're back on your heels trying to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to meet a bunch of special requests from people that are coming in. People are coming late to class. No, we're not doing this. So again, you can teach however you want. You can use name, like all of the things I share in these episodes with you, in large part are, number one, to give you an idea of what's possible. Number two, to share with you what I truly believe is probably very different from stuff you're hearing and stuff you're seeing, because I'm just a very different kind of yoga teacher. I look at things very differently. And I want you to see when you come on these episodes and you listen and or watch on YouTube, that the things that I talk about are totally possible for you. So when I talked to a yoga teacher in the DMs just today, and she said, I never even thought of walking around the room. I only thought I could practice with my class. I'm like, oh my God, you never thought that? And then I think, well, no wonder, because every yoga class she's probably gone to, the teacher's been up there practicing. So this is what I mean about helping you see what's possible, rather than thinking there's this narrow perimeter around the kind of yoga teacher you can be. You can do whatever you want. You could teach in the library, you could teach in the coffee shop, you could teach in a hospital, you could teach in studios, all different places you can teach. You could teach 15-minute short classes. You could teach 2-hour long, like there's so many different things you could do. You can be the kind of teacher who walks around. You could be the kind of teacher who just teaches from action. You could be the kind of teacher who develops their own teaching methodology. Let's say your name is, I don't know, I'm just picking a name. So let's say your name is Susan Anderson. You could create the Anderson method, which could illustrate your sequence. And you could get known for that. So good at it, you would never even have to think about your sequence when you go into teach it. Imagine that, getting so good at your sequence that you literally name it. This is the Anderson method. This is the Susan Anderson method. So that's what we're here to talk about today. What is possible? What sparks your interest? What makes you feel excited about teaching? And that's what we want to lean into. Not a bunch of rules, not a bunch of rigid thinking, not a bunch of consumer-driven things that make you jump through all these hoops. I want to put you in the driver's seat to be the kind of yoga teacher you truly want to be. Okay, so we've come to the end of kind of the bulk of today's episode. I want to give you an action step. I want to give you an action step to do, if you're willing, over the next 2 weeks. Now, if you're listening to this close to when I recorded it, obviously that's going to be in November, December of 2024, but all my episodes are evergreen, so who knows when you're listening to this. At any point in time, when you're listening to this episode, take the next 2 weeks, and what I want you to do is look for one of these scenarios to pop up and see if you're willing to experiment with the approach we discussed in this episode. And then when you experiment with that approach, send me a DM on Instagram and let me know how it goes. So that's your takeaway. That's your action step to do. Now, the next thing I want to share with you is a little bit more of an action step. So this is a little bit more of a global thing versus a specific action related to the lesson we discussed today. And that is, if you're looking to learn more about movement in general, I recently loaded up a free PDF on my Instagram page. You can just get it by going to the link in my Instagram bio. In fact, you're listening on your phone, so just go to the link in my Instagram bio right now. You can do it while you're still listening to me here and download it. It's called the Concepts in Movement PDF. And that is full of movement-based concepts that are not taught in teacher training. I pulled from my experience in exercise science and put those in a PDF, and I want you to have that. So that's the Concepts in Movement PDF. You can get to it only on my Instagram page, the link in my bio. And then the last thing I want to share with you, and this one is time sensitive. From now in November through the end of December 2024, I am offering a brand new payment plan to make it easy, so easy for you to say yes to yourself, not to me, to say yes to yourself when it comes to enrolling in my program so that you can be the kind of teacher you dream of being. I've added a brand new payment plan. It's the lowest amount ever offered to get into my program. It's $367. Okay, so it's almost $200 off the original payment plan option. Before, if you didn't pay in full, you would start out by making one payment of $550. Now you can get started for just $367. And then you'll make 5 more payments of that. So just $367 will get you full access to the program and access to coaching calls with me. Now you get more coaching calls and more support from me when you pay for the program in full. If you pay for the program in the payment plan format, you still get coaching calls from me. You just don't get as many, but you definitely get full access to the video portal of the program, which has my step-by-step way to learn anatomy and how to apply it to your cues and sequences. Now, there's limited spots available until the end of the year, and this additional payment plan is only available until 1/1/2025. So don't wait. Before I take this down, take a look. To get to the link to enroll, go to my Instagram bio, and the link is there. You can also go to my website, barebonesyoga.com, and the link is there as well, right on the homepage. The last thing I'll say is when you listen to the final 60 seconds of this episode, you're going to hear a podcast offer, and that's even an additional way you can enroll with a special incentive just for you because you listen to the podcast. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. I want to thank you so much for pressing play and listening with me today or watching me here on YouTube. As always, great to be with you. Keep up the amazing work you're doing in your classes. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll talk to you next week on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Bye-bye. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.